So AI shooting. Now we're really going to start motoring, and I'm going to work it quite a bit quicker now than what we used to. So I'm going to right click on sprites. I'm going to create a new sprite. Now this would be perfect if I'm just going to create something that's new or something that's different. I am, however, lazy, and the enemy is going to shoot a laser very similar to this laser that we've already created. So I can right click on that and duplicate it or make an exact copy. It will default its name to the first available sprite. We're going to call that SPR_enemy laser. Notice I've used a capital L to separate those things, and I haven't used a space. Spaces break things really badly, so if ever you do wish to put a space in, make sure you use an underscore, or you separate things with capital letters to make the words clear what they are. What I am, however, going to do is to edit that sprite, and I'm going to double click on that graphic just as before. I'm going to use my fill bucket tool, and I'm going to select the red button. If you notice that for whatever reason this doesn't work, just make sure that this opacity value here is 255, otherwise this won't fill. And I'm just going to fill in there. It's appropriate that our enemies shoot red laser beams because red is obviously evil. What we're now going to have though is we need that new object, just in the same way we did before for our object laser. Now I am going to do this from scratch, so we're going to do obj_enemy laser, capital L, and we're going to associate the sprite. What we are now going to say is this enemy laser is going to have very similar properties, which are on create. We are going to move down at a speed of your choice. Again, I'm going to go with about 10. And direction is going to equal 270, because that's what down is. Before we actually go into testing, because I know that this is going to work, I'm going to also say when I collide with the spaceship, this is going to be our lose condition. We are going to say, just for now, as soon as the enemy laser touches the spaceship, that's game over. You've completely lost. We are going to restart the game. Just as we did before when we were trying to figure out what things did what for naming conventions, we can probably guess what this instruction is going to be. If I want to restart the game, well, that's to do with the game. What can game do? Oh, there's stuff. Okay, and here's all the things that I can do with game. You'll notice this trick works exactly the same way if you're trying to perhaps do something with your room. Perhaps you're trying to restart it in some capacity, or you want to go to a different level. For our purposes, we want to do something with the game. We're going to completely restart the game. And game_restart. They did try and make this easy for us. But again, this comes with experience. You get familiar for the flavour of language. I'm not going to put a comment in there because game_restart is nice and clear what it means. At the minute though, we haven't really done anything. We need to do some spawning for this. So the enemy laser knows to create and it knows to restart the game when it touches the player. We now need to have our enemy spawn some. So we need to say that the enemy is going to spawn some, and we're going to use a technique for this. We're not going to have a regular cooldown to start with. We're going to have a random chance of it spawning one every frame. So we're going to start dealing with random numbers very quickly. So I'm going to use the step event. Read step as frame. So every frame something happens. And we want this to happen at the middle of every frame, which is the top option there, step and step. What I now want in my code is to say generate a random number. And it wants to be a whole number. So we're going a bit advanced here, but for now just accept that we are going to create a random number. Now, because it's random numbers, we're going to call this dice. It can be called anything under the sun, but dice makes sense. Because we're going to have a 1 in 6 chance of it actually spawning a bullet, so it makes sense to call it dice. I'm then going to create an I random. Notice the I. I means whole number. Whereas random will work, but it won't generate a whole number. Which means later on when we test, was it a 1, was it a 2, was it a 3, it might have generated a 2.56, which isn't the same as a 2. Again, just as before, it's expecting a bracket. So our regular bracket's there. It tells me wrong number of arguments to function or script. Argument is their term for using the word parameter. So this tells me it's incomplete because it wants a number. It wants a random number. What I can do here instead is use iRandom range, which now wants 2 parameters. Because it's a range, it wants the lowest number and it wants the highest number. So my lowest number is going to be 1, my highest number is going to be 6, and now it's happening. So iRandom_range. What I'm now going to start dealing with is this concept of if statements. If statement makes a decision based on something. So if, and then regular brackets. dice, that dice that I've just rolled, I want to see what it was. I'm using two equal signs here. It's really important that we do that. If dice was a 1, and then squigglies, open and close squiggly. If dice was a 1, we're going to create a new object. If you think you can do this without my help, by all means go for it. I'll give you a second. Pause if you want to. Okay, let's see if we did that right. So, instance is our keyword for creating new objects, and create is the other thing we're looking for. Instance underscore create. Wants 3 parameters, which is where am I. I want it to spawn where I am. Notice this time it's nothing to do with the player, it's the enemy's position. Spawn where this enemy is. My X, my Y, and the object I want to create is obviously obj underscore enemy laser. Okay, I was hoping it was going to autocomplete, but didn't. Again, just for ease of simplicity, I'm not going to pop comments in here, but you can easily see the useful thing that we could say. This for us is generating a random number. This is seeing was it a 1, and this was making a laser if it was a 1. So there's actually 3 instructions that we've got there. Let's see if it works, and I think it's going to start raining. Yes. And update. Quite a fun little challenge to try and not get squished, but a little bit too difficult at the minute. I think ridiculously too difficult. So now we go from functionality to polish. The enemy, every step, is creating some dice, and there's 30 frames per second, and there's a 1 in 6 chance of it making an enemy, which is why there's so many bullets. So the enemy's spawning a lot of bullets. If I say create a range of 1 to 30, what this now means is roughly every second, give or take, it should make a bullet per enemy. So that's much more sensible now. Maybe still too much, maybe not enough, but the challenge is certainly there. And again, the more enemies that you have, the more difficult this certainly becomes. So we've definitely got lose mechanics at the minute. We can get killed quite easily. What we need now is a win mechanic, some way of winning our game. If I can actually defeat these 2 enemies. Come on, wall, there we go. So the challenge is now, I've defeated all my enemies and nothing's happened. We haven't told it to. What we now need to say is, once I've actually defeated the enemies, go to the next level. So I'm going to create myself a new room. And we can change the background of this room. We can add different sprites onto this. We can have a win message. We can have a lose message. Whatever it is that perhaps you've put in your design can go here. All I'm going to do for now, just for testing, you can change this to your heart's content, is I'm just going to replace it with a yellow background screen, just to show you that this is a different level. It hasn't just bugged in some capacity. And I'm going to rename this windscreen. You could obviously replace, when you get shot, currently it restarts the game, you could replace that with go to a lose screen using the same thing we're going to look at now. What I'm currently saying though, is every time the enemy laser touches a spaceship, the game is restarting, so that's fine. What I now want to say is every time the laser touches an enemy, we're currently destroying the other thing and then destroying ourselves. I am going to put comments in for this one. This is going to count how many enemy are alive. Also, I've corrected that spelling mistake up there for the very astute amongst you. Count how many enemy are alive. Enemies. Count how many enemies are alive. If it is 0, win game. So that's going to be our comment. Now we're going to code that in. Look at the language of that. Count if. They're computing terms. We're going to use those. If. So if is our instruction, is the thing that we're going to check. And we need to check the number of objects in the room. We know that instance is our keyword to do with objects. Let's see if there's something to do with counting. Instance underscore exists. This is the one we're going to use here. What this will return, and again I need other brackets inside of that because it wants to know which object we're counting for. If obj underscore enemy exists. So we're not necessarily counting, but we're saying, is it more than 0? We're saying, do they exist? So if instance enemy exists, what we're going to do now is room underscore go to. Then it wants to know which room we're going to go to, and I'm going to go to windscreen. The problem is here, this is saying if enemies do exist, go to the windscreen. Let's try not. If they don't exist, let's go to the windscreen. Let's see what that does. We've gone to our windscreen. Windscreen's very bland, very boring, but you can easily update that and you can change that to your heart's content. So let me just explain what this bit of logic is doing here. That is the instruction that is returning either true or false, dependent on what it's looking for. So if instance exists enemy, if there are instances of enemy still alive, do this. Not swaps it around if there aren't enemies on screen. For people that might be familiar with computer science, you can replace that with an exclamation mark, which does the same thing, which refers to not, and don't do that. Let's just make sure that is the case, but not works fine. GameMaker is incredibly good because it's designed for a variety of different levels and strength and experience, and there we've gone. So I'm going to replace that with that works, but I'm going to put it back as not because it's a little bit more easy for me to read. So we've got the enemy shooting, we've got win and lose mechanics. What I'm going to do now is give some optional videos for people who want to take it a little bit further, perhaps add lives or menus or different things into their game to take it a little bit more complicated. But if you've got that, you've got all the cool features that you now need for this week.